Hello, dear students. In this video, we will learn about mechanisms of evolution. At the end of the lesson, you will be able to explain how natural selection and genetic drift drives evolutionary change, analyze how adaptations increase survival, and explain how speciation occurs. Here is the essential question. How do natural selection and genetic drift work together to cause a population to change over time? Evolution works at the population level. Individuals do not evolve during their lifetime. Instead, evolution happens when the gene pool of a population changes over generations. The gene pool includes all the alleles, or gene versions, present in the population. Natural selection and genetic drift are two major mechanisms that alter gene frequencies. Natural selection tends to have a stronger effect in large populations, while genetic drift is more influential in small ones. This slide contrasts Lamarck's and Darwin's explanations for giraffe evolution. Lamarck believed traits acquired during life could be inherited, such as stretching the neck. However, there is no evidence that acquired traits are passed genetically. Darwin's theory explains that giraffes are born with variation in neck length. Those with longer necks had better access to food, survived more often, and produced more offspring. Because neck length is inherited, the trait increased over generations. Individuals with traits that increase survival and reproduction leave more offspring. These advantageous traits are inherited and become more common in future generations. Evolution happens because these genetic features accumulate over time. The key idea is that natural selection favors traits that work well in a specific environment. This diagram illustrates the basic steps of natural selection using snails. First, populations produce more offspring than can survive. Second, individuals show variation, meaning they are not all the same. Some variations help organisms survive better in their environment. Natural selection then favors those better-suited individuals. Finally, because traits are inherited, survivors pass these traits to their offspring. So over generations, the population changes. This slide highlights two key conditions for natural selection. First, organisms produce more offspring than can survive, which leads to competition. Second, individuals within a population show variation in traits such as color or pattern. This slide visually explains how natural selection operates in a population. Individuals are born with inherited differences in traits such as coloration. When predators are present, individuals with less favorable traits are more likely to be eliminated. Those with advantageous traits survive longer and reproduce more successfully. Because these traits are inherited, they become more frequent in the next generation. Over time, the population becomes better adapted to its environment. This process does not involve choice or effort by the organisms. Let us consider industrial melanism in peppered moths. In clean environments, light-colored moths blend in better and avoid predators. When pollution darkened tree bark, dark-colored moths became harder to see and survived more often. As a result, dark moths increased in the population. This slide illustrates evolution through natural selection using pesticide resistance. In the original population, some insects already carry a genetic allele that gives resistance to the pesticide. When the pesticide is applied, it acts as a selection pressure, killing non-resistant individuals. The resistant insects survive and reproduce, passing their resistance allele to the next generation. With repeated pesticide use, the proportion of resistant insects increases. This process demonstrates descent with modification, meaning populations gradually change while remaining related to their ancestors. Adaptations are traits that make an organism better suited to its environment. These traits can be structural, behavioral, or physiological. Over generations, individuals with helpful traits survive and reproduce more successfully. As a result, those traits become more common in the population. This diagram shows Darwin's finches, which evolved from a single ancestral species. As finches spread across different islands, they encountered different food sources. Natural selection favored beak shapes, best suited for each diet. Over time, these differences became more pronounced, leading to multiple finch species. Camouflage is an evolutionary adaptation. Different mantis species have body shapes and colors that match their environments, such as flowers or leaves. Individuals that were harder to see were less likely to be eaten and more likely to survive. These traits were inherited by their offspring. These images show different defensive adaptations that evolved through natural selection. Some animals use mechanical defenses like spines, others use chemical defenses like toxins. Some species rely on coloration, either to warn predators that they are dangerous or to blend into their surroundings. The mimic octopus shows behavioral mimicry by changing its shape and movement to resemble dangerous animals. This slide shows cichlid fishes from Lake Victoria, which evolved into many species with different feeding adaptations. Although natural selection shaped traits like jaw structure, small population sizes also made genetic drift important. Changes in gene frequencies helped populations diverge quickly. Genetic drift is a mechanism of evolution. Genetic drift occurs when allele frequencies change due to random sampling of individuals, especially in small populations. This concept was proposed by biologist Sewell Greenwright. Two common examples of genetic drift are the bottleneck effect and the founder effect. Because drift is random, alleles can be lost even if they are beneficial. Over time, this reduces genetic variation in the population. A bottleneck occurs when a population suddenly becomes very small due to events like natural disasters, disease outbreaks, or habitat destruction. The surviving individuals are a random sample of the original population. As a result, many alleles are lost. This diagram illustrates the bottleneck effect using a simple analogy. The original population has many different alleles, shown as different colored marbles. When the population experiences a sudden reduction in size, only a small number of individuals survive by chance. The surviving group carries only a fraction of the original gene pool. As a result, allele frequencies change randomly, and genetic diversity is greatly reduced. Importantly, the surviving traits are not necessarily better, just lucky. This slide explains the bottleneck effect step by step. The original population has many genetic variants. A sudden environmental disaster sharply reduces population size. The individuals that survive are not chosen based on fitness, but by chance. Because of this, many alleles are lost from the gene pool. Even if the population grows again, the lost genetic variation does not return. This can make populations more vulnerable to future changes. This diagram shows how the bottleneck effect alters allele frequencies. The original population is genetically diverse. A bottleneck event removes many individuals, and the survivors carry only some alleles. Because survival is random, the frequency of alleles in the surviving population differs from the original one. Over generations, these new frequencies become established. This change is not driven by adaptation or natural selection. Founder effect is a type of genetic drift. A new population formed by a small group carries limited genetic variation from the original population. Because the population is small and often isolated, genetic drift has a strong effect. Certain alleles may become common, even if they were rare before. In some cases, this can contribute to the formation of new species or increase the frequency of genetic diseases. Let us explore how founder effect occurs. In the original population, there is high genetic variation. When a few individuals become separated, such as moving to a new island, they form a new population. These founders carry only a small sample of the original gene pool. As a result, some traits become common while others are missing entirely. This happens by chance, not because those traits are advantageous. Over generations, the population remains genetically different from the original one. This diagram explains how the founder effect alters allele frequencies. In the original population, alleles occur at certain frequencies. When only a few individuals establish a new population, they represent a random sample of the original gene pool. As a result, some alleles become more common, while others disappear completely. These differences persist across generations, especially if the population remains small or isolated. This change is not due to adaptation. It is due to chance. This diagram explains hybridization using two species of toads. When environmental conditions change, the habitats of related species may overlap. In these overlap regions, called hybrid zones, individuals from different species can interbreed. The offspring show mixed genetic traits. Hybridization also occurs between different bear species. Genetic data reveal that some bear species, such as brown bears and polar bears, can interbreed. Their offspring carry genetic traits from both parents. The phylogenetic tree shows how closely related these species are. Speciation means the formation of new species. In biology, a species is defined as a group of organisms that can mate and produce fertile offspring. So for one species to split into two, something must stop successful reproduction between groups. Over time, genetic differences build up, and these differences affect mating or reproduction. When mating no longer happens, or offspring cannot survive or reproduce, speciation has occurred. Geographic isolation occurs when members of a population are physically separated from each other. This separation can happen when the original habitat is divided, such as by rivers, mountains, or land movement. Once separated, the populations no longer mate with each other. Over time, each group experiences different environments, leading to different adaptations and genetic changes. Scientists believe this is a very common way speciation begins. This figure shows different ways geographic isolation can occur. In one example, a few individuals colonize a remote area, forming a new population. In another, a barrier like a river splits a population into two. In the last example, intermediate populations go extinct, leaving remaining groups isolated. In all cases, physical separation prevents mating, allowing genetic differences to accumulate over time. Reproductive isolation refers to mechanisms that prevent individuals from different species from mating with each other. These mechanisms can act before or after mating and stop gene flow between species. Even when two species live in overlapping areas, reproductive isolation keeps them genetically separate. This preserves the genetic identity of each species. Most species have more than one isolating mechanism, making it very unlikely that a single barrier failure will lead to interbreeding. This infographic shows two forms of reproductive isolation. Ecological isolation occurs when species live in different environments and rarely encounter each other, like the Arctic fox and the desert fox. Temporal isolation happens when species reproduce at different times. For example, the leopard frog mates in early spring, while the bullfrog mates in early summer. Even though they live in similar areas, timing differences prevent mating, so isolation can happen without physical barriers. This slide shows behavioral and mechanical isolation. Behavioral isolation occurs when species have different mating displays. The prairie chicken does not respond to the mating display of the ring-necked pheasant. Mechanical isolation happens when reproductive structures do not fit or function together. For example, plants adapted for hummingbird pollination cannot be pollinated by bees. In both cases, mating or fertilization fails because the systems are incompatible. This slide shows isolating mechanisms that occur after mating. Gametic isolation happens when sperm and egg cannot fuse, such as between a dog and a cat. Hybrid inviability occurs when fertilization happens, but the offspring does not survive, like goat and sheep hybrids. Hybrid infertility occurs when offspring survive, but cannot reproduce, such as zebroids from horses and zebras. These mechanisms prevent gene flow even after mating. Let us consider the following examples of reproductive isolating mechanisms. Lions and tigers live in overlapping areas in India, but they use different parts of the habitat, so they do not usually encounter each other to mate. A mule is produced by mating a horse and a donkey. Although the mule is strong and healthy, it is sterile and cannot reproduce. Both examples prevent gene flow between species, helping maintain species boundaries. Here are more examples. On the left is behavioral isolation in bowerbirds. Each species has a unique courtship display, and females only respond to the correct one. On the right, the blue-footed booby uses a very specific courtship dance. Females choose mates based on that behavior. If the behavior is different, mating does not occur. This slide introduces human evolution. Humans belong to the species Homo sapiens, which evolved in Africa about 315,000 years ago. We are upright walking, culture-bearing organisms, and the only living members of the group called hominini. The images show earlier human relatives, such as Australopithecus and Homo erectus, which shared traits with modern humans but are now extinct. Human evolution is not a straight line, but a branching tree with many related species. This diagram shows the evolutionary relationships among primates. Primates include prosimians, monkeys, and hominoids, which are apes. Humans belong to the hominin group within the great apes. Traits such as binocular vision, opposable thumbs, and larger brains evolved earlier in primate history. Humans are most closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos, sharing a recent common ancestor. This does not mean humans evolved from chimpanzees, but that both species evolved from the same ancestral population. This map shows the migration of modern humans across the world. Most scientists agree that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. From Africa, small groups migrated into Asia, Europe, Australia, and eventually the Americas. These movements happened over tens of thousands of years, following coastlines, land bridges, and available resources. Human migration explains why people around the world share a common ancestry, but still show regional differences today. This diagram compares the human lineage with other great apes over millions of years. It shows that humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas all share a common ancestor. From that ancestor, different lineages branched off. The human lineage includes several extinct species before Homo sapiens appeared. Importantly, humans did not evolve from chimpanzees. Instead, both groups evolved separately from the same ancestral population. This explains why humans and chimpanzees are closely related but still clearly different species. This diagram shows the human family tree over millions of years. It highlights several hominin groups, including Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and the Homo group. These groups did not evolve one after another in a straight line. Instead, many species existed at the same time. Some branches ended in extinction, while one branch eventually led to modern humans. To answer the essential question, natural selection drives populations to adapt to their environment by favoring individuals with beneficial traits, while genetic drift randomly changes allele frequencies, often leading to the loss of genetic variation, especially in small populations. To conclude, define natural selection, give one example of genetic drift, and explain how small changes can lead to evolution. Thank you for listening.